Tales from the wild. Stories from the heart. A journey into the mind and soul of fired-up business professionals where they share their vision for the future. And hear from a different non-profit organization every month as they create awareness of their goals and their needs. Dive into a world of untamed passion as we join our host, Shireen Buerta, for this month's episode of Friends from Wild Places.
Lisa, it's so amazing because a lot of people that have been sexually abused grow up into their adult and literally die with those secrets and live life throughout, do whatever they need to, and just never speak a word of it to anyone. And so I guess what my question and I'm trying to get at is, at what point did you decide to make the decision to write a book about it? Because that's really going and putting it out to the world,
It is, and it was very hard to do so. But my defining moment was I'm married. I have 3 young children. I found out that I became pregnant with a 4th. That was not a planned pregnancy. It was a big surprise. And unfortunately, I lost that child. I was probably about 14 weeks pregnant and the heartbeat stopped. And I had to go in for a procedure to have this baby removed. And it was in that moment when I had to go through that procedure that my past came rushing back and hit me square in the face. Because I did become pregnant at the age of 14 by my sexual abuser, and my sexual abuser was pretty torturistic and sadistic in the abuse that he bestowed upon me, and that damage was so intensely deep that it did put me into such silence. But this moment of having to go through this procedure and this part of my life brought me right back to the exact moment when I did go and have an abortion, because there was no way I can have a child after being through the abuse that I had gone through. I was too young. I was too damaged. There was no way that I can care for a child. And I was smart enough and wise enough to know that. And we did make that decision. But in that moment, I did, it all came back to me. And after that procedure, I was having horrendous flashbacks and nightmares of, all the things that I had been through. And I had to make that choice to face it once and for all. And I decided, okay, now it's time to go to therapy. Now it's time to break that silence. And I have to tell you, it was so difficult for me to say those words out loud. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear my own voice say what happened to me. But once I did, the floodgates were open. It was all on the table. And before you knew it, I was sharing it all. And it was powerful. It was obviously emotional and all of these things. But that's when I realized that taking what happened to me, I needed to put it out there, not just for my therapist and myself. I had to share these things with my husband, who didn't know all these things, which blew him away. But I realized that I needed to share this with the world because people need to understand really what abuse and sexual abuse does to a child and a young adult. What is the damage and how deep does it go? So that was my fuel, my passion, to take all of the pain that I've been through and make it into something purposeful, make it into a positive, because by breaking my silence and sharing my story, I'm always hoping that that's going to give someone else the courage to share their story. And I have to tell you, many people have told me after hearing me speak or reading my book and following me online and social media, that they have come to a point in their life where they've decided that it's time for them to do the same, and they're on their healing journeys. And that to me is such a beautiful gift to give to other people. And it just validates everything that I'm doing is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
And when you first came public with your book, which again I have read quite a few years ago, how did you, I'm going to say, like, manage the, I'm sure there's people like that, are supporting of you, like family and friends. And then I'm sure that there's people that you probably never even heard of or don't even know that are like the haters out there, right? I mean, I can't imagine that you've gone through this journey without experiencing that. So can you shed some light as far as when you went public, what was actually the, like, what was the reality at that time, with family, friends, and people that you didn't even know?
Yes, so much happened when my story came out because first of all, I wrote my story very differently. I wrote my story through the eyes of a child, sharing the child's perspective of abuse. So my story is not an adult reflecting, looking back on what happened. Mine is like bamming in your face, right in the moment, very raw, profound, choppy at times. It's like a clouded view when you read it sometimes because that just speaks to the damaged mind of the child. That is the route I wanted to go. So at that time, when I came out, I had a lot of haters in regards to the way I published my book. I had people say to me, "Oh, your story is not eloquent. It's not pretty. It's not put together appropriately." And my advice and my thoughts on all of that is always like, well, is abuse eloquent? Is abuse pretty? Is it perfect? No, it's ugly, it's choppy, it's clouded, it's disgusting. I wanted my story and my voice to be heard in such a powerful way that people would stop and take notice. And they did. And,
Mhm.
as far as family, oh my goodness, that was like a proverbial bomb because my family, a lot of them disowned me after my story came out, which was very painful to go through on top of everything else. But I stood strong in my virtue. I stood strong in my story. It's 100%, real and it's how it happened. And I own every bit of it. But I did lose family members because of it. And I had other ones that were angry with me that kind of came to terms with things as time went on. But I also have far more people who have embraced my story, who have embraced my inner child, the damaged child, and relate to it because it's just so authentic. It's so real when you read it and I talk about it. This is reality. This is life. This is what truly does happen behind those closed doors. So I've had both, the positive, the negative. I had honestly one presentation, I had a woman stood up and started yelling at me because I chose to forgive my mother and stand by her. This woman was so angry with me. So angry. She couldn't contain herself. And this is a room of over 100 people that I'm speaking. And it was a social workers conference. And this woman was just really angry. But when what I said to her was, I am sorry for whatever you went through in your life, that this is so triggering for you. And I hope that you can find healing and peace. And she was not even happy with that she just continued to banter and left, then came back, bought my book, left, and then wrote the worst book review in the world. I like it was just what she wrote. But when I read her book review, as upset as I was that she wrote it in such a negative way, all the points that she hit and the things that she talked about really showed me that this woman has been through some serious damage that she has just not been able to address and work through. And that really made me feel bad for her because my goal is never to hurt anybody. My goal is always to help people. So I've seen that aspect. And I've also seen, people will come up to me after an author talk. I had a woman who came up to me, she was in her late 70s, and she held my hands and she cried and she disclosed her abuse from childhood that nobody has ever heard. She's standing there with her daughter. They're crying. Her daughter never heard this story before. And we talked about it. And she just said to me that by me standing up there and sharing my story, finally, after all these years, gave her courage and strength to do the same. It was just such a powerful moment that to think about this woman in her late 70s held it tight all those years. And I gave her a safe space to speak. And that always just touches my heart and humbles me.
Yeah. Wow. What a heartfelt. What was the time frame, Lisa, as far as if you can just walk our listeners through the time frame as far as so when you were facing like this crisis situation in the hospital with the flashbacks, what year was that? And then you started, kind of processing your own emotions, and then decided to write your book. Can you just walk us through just for like some dates, just for reference points for us?
Yes, and I'm thinking back because my book came out in 2016. So 6 years prior to that. So that brings you back to, 2000s. Like, that's really when I really started going through those things. My kids were young. I was, working through all of that stuff. And when I talk about therapy, I've been to therapy a couple of different times and I had a couple of different therapists. And I have to say, the first therapist and the last therapist really were so hugely helpful. My first therapist gave me this safe space to really share and talk about what happened to me. My last therapist is the one who encouraged me to continue to write, to write all my things down. So you're talking, 2000, like 2010, 2000s when I first went, 2010 when I really was digging deep into the writing aspect and pushing forward to putting my book together. I remember going to therapy and I would bring him short stories and he would look at them and he would keep them all saved. And one day he pulled them all out and he handed them to me and he goes, "You realize you just wrote a book." And
Oh,
I'm
wow.
like,
Wow.
I
Wow.
guess I did. I guess I wrote a book. So, and from that point, I took all of that information and worked to put it into story form. And it was a huge process. It was a massive healing process, to go through it and break through all these pieces and really, put my life into perspective of how it all happened and, what I went through, the good, the bad, the ugly, and how I came out on the other side sane and doing the things that I do. I've had people say that to me. I can't believe that you are so grounded and insane after all of these things that have happened to you. And I chalk a lot of that up to faith, and I chalk a lot of that up to hope and God and all those things. I'm a very spiritual person.
Mm.
And I know in my dark times, I really dug deep into some spirituality to get me through.
Mm.
So, and that strong inner strength and inner will to go on, to fight no matter what happens. You're going to continue to fight. I had that inner spirit of that fighting nature always.
Yeah,
Right.
it's
Right. And your
amazing.
second book now is kind of in tribute and memory of your mother. Is that correct with the book currently?
Well, it is, yes. So my mom, struggled obviously profusely with mental illness. So what I did was I wrote my mother's story from birth to death, everything in between, and our complex relationship as mother and daughter. And my mother's story is very powerful, and it shows you generational abuse. It shows you generational mental illness. My mother asked me to write her story. She said, "Promise me that one day you will share my story so people can understand what people with mental illness really do go through and how it affects everyone around them." And I promised my mother that. And my mother shared all the stories of the past, wrote so many things down. And then I was able to fill in those blanks and walk in her steps, which was such an amazing experience. I have to tell you, from writing my story was one thing. Writing my mother's story was such a whole other world to step into,
Mm.
her childhood, her adulthood, and how it affected my family, throughout our lives. But the one thing I can tell you is that I really found different pieces of my mother that I didn't tap into because I was always riding on that fight or flight mode, the anger mode with her, and it was so hard. But really going through her life, I really tapped into who Joanne was, the person, my mother, this intelligent, beautiful woman who wanted nothing more to be a wife, a mother. She had a beautiful career as a hairdresser. She was very talented. And one by one, all those things were stripped away from her. And the loss of my brother. My brother passed away at the age of 9. She lost her only son. All those things were all stripped from her, and she battled mental illness so fiercely. So her story is a very powerful and important story to tell. And it's amazing to think that I was able to do that for my mother.
Mm.
And I used my story and her story to advocate and to bring awareness.
Well, yeah, and I just think it's definitely meant to be because everything seemed to have worked out the way it should. The fact that you had you wrote your story, you sent it out into the world, you had family members disown you, as you said, your actual abuser, one of them being your very own mother, who actually turned around and said, wasn't even angry, but I mean, said, would you mind writing my story? And I can only imagine how many emotions you must have gone through having to write that point and perspective, being your abuser's perspective, because there's not a lot of people that know or want to know their abuser's perspective. Quite frankly, I think a lot of people want to make sure that their abusers stay on the other side of the world and never see them ever again. So this is quite a unique situation, and beautiful, inspiring story of healing for you and your mom. So that was really important that you shared that. But before we continue, Lisa, Tanya, let me just jump in here with a little bit of a Buzzsprout ad. So Friends from Wild Places is a place to share stories from other business owners and professionals such as Lisa, a safe space to show support for other business owners and entrepreneurs all over the world. We feature nonprofits every month to try and make a difference and give a helpline to someone in need. Do you have a message you want to share with the world, or maybe you just think it'll be fun to have your own talk show? Podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online. To start your own podcast, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you, and it does help support our show. The team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. So, Lisa, back to you, and your inspiring story. If I don't know if we've asked, I don't think we have asked this question, but what is the name of your books, and where can we go and purchase these books?
Yes, so my story is The Unspoken Truth, a memoir. And when I wrote this story, that term, the unspoken, is really what gravitated to me, to put, a name to my own personal story. So The Unspoken Truth, a memoir. And my mom's story is The Book of Joanne. And you can find my books on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I always encourage people to go to my website, lisazarcone.net. I have all the information there as well. And if people come to my website, they can see more about my story. I do a lot of blogging and poetry and different things like that. And also it just shows you like events, and when I'm speaking at different speaking engagements, they can see, what I'm doing. But definitely, Amazon and Barnes and Noble are the two big places everybody goes to purchase my books.
And Lisa, and when you wrote your first book, your mom was living at that time, is that correct?
My mom was living at that time, and she actually passed away before it became published, but she knew I was writing my own story, and she encouraged me to write my own story. The interesting thing about my mom was that, again, severely mentally ill, and most of the time we rode what I call the crazy train, and not to be disrespectful, but we did ride that train, that roller coaster of everything, because she cycled so quickly all the time. But then she would have these moments of clarity. And in these moments of clarity, we would have the most amazing conversations. And honestly, when I would go visit my mother, because my mom was in a nursing home, and I would go visit her, I would always say a little prayer: please give me a day of clarity. Just give me a little piece of my mom. And when those things happened, and they weren't all the time, believe me, they were far and few between. Most of the time it was chaos and a lot happening. But when I had those moments with her and we really just talked about things, she was just so spot on about life, wisdom, what she really understood about herself and her illness, and how she knew how it affected me and the damage, that happened to me. So we would have these moments of clarity that were just amazing. But she did not, see the book come to life, but I know she traveled that path with me. And I can also tell you, when my mom's book came out, my mom's book was supposed to come out in September of 2023. And we had all of these, roadblocks and things were happening, and I was frustrated. I'm like, I just want to get her story out there. And finally, when the book came out, my publisher writes me and says, here's your date. And it was January 28th, 2024. My mom passed away on January 28th, 2014. I was
Wow.
blown away by the date and the
Yeah.
connection. And my mom's birthday is June 24th. So you have January 28th, 2024. And to me, that's fate. To me, I'm a firm believer in those things. And I felt like that was just a massive sign from my mother, clapping from the heavens, saying, Lisa, you did it. You did it. You got your
Just
story
got
out there.
chills
You
when you
got my
said that,
story.
Lisa. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just got chills when you said that. It's true. Yeah.
It was amazing. And it was just so shocking, of all dates. How did that happen? It was supposed to be fall of 2023. Now here we are in 2024 on the date of my mother's passing. To me, that was just a massive sign to say, again, you're in the right direction. You're doing what you were always meant to do, and keep on going.
Yeah. And I'm so like I don't know if that word is happy, but I guess I'm just hearing in what you're sharing, about your relationship with your mother, that she was alive when you wrote your story, and she actually encouraged you to do that, which is really, that's quite profound. If like as Shireen said, most of the time it's like the abusers, you want them literally across the world or not on the world or not in the world. And to hear you say that, because you kind of, I'm going to use the word, not came full circle, but kind of put those pieces back in a very maybe indirect way, that it's really profound in hearing it.
Yes, and I know, like, a lot of people, when you go through abuse, and it's hard to look at your abuser and say, I'm going to give forgiveness, or I'm going to give empathy, and all of those things. And I'm really careful when I speak about forgiveness, because that is just its own entity. When you go on your healing journey, that's one piece of it. The forgiveness is a whole nother, but that's just a very personal thing that you have to decide that you want to look into and want to tap into. So for me, I wanted to find forgiveness to my parents. So I took the initiative to look through their eyes. And look at their perspective of what their lives were like, why it all fell apart, and why did the abuse happen to me. That was such extremely hard work to do. I did one parent at a time, walk their life path, and it really put into perspective, and it gave me answers to the why and how it fell apart, the why and how the abuse was bestowed upon me. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean that they made the right decisions. The abuse is what the abuse is, and that they can never change. But by walking in their footsteps, I was able to find compassion and empathy and forgiveness, because I know their roads that they traveled were so, so difficult. And it's just unfortunate that generational abuse piece continued on into my life. But I was able to find forgiveness to both of my parents. And I even extended this, which is going to sound maybe wild to both of you, is that I walked the footsteps of my sexual abuser in part of my own healing process, to find understanding to the why and how it came to such horrific sexual abuse. And what I found in his childhood, that he was an abused child. He was horrifically abused. His parents were alcoholic and drug addicts. He was sexually abused by his own mother. He had mental illness as well. And unfortunately, he fell through the cracks, and he was treated horrendous. And that came forward and dropped into my lap, the innocent victim. So I found empathy for his small child, his empathy for his inner child that was so damaged. Did I find forgiveness? I'm going to be very, very honest. No, I did not find forgiveness, because he went on to abuse so many other people after me. He abused his wife, his children. And I know that because I had one of his daughters came forward and questioned me about my book, The Unspoken Truth, and asked me about her father. And she disclosed information to me about his past and all of the things that he did. And I could not find forgiveness, because that abuse just went on so horrifically and so horrendously. But I did find empathy for him, because he didn't deserve to be treated that way as a child. No child deserves to be abused.
That's awesome. That's amazing, Lisa. Sure. If I could be more like you, just amazing. It's amazing. You really are a great inspiration and an example that it's possible, Tune in next week for part 3 of Friends from Wild Places.
You've been listening to Friends from Wild Places with Shireen Bueta. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast from the links to catch every episode and unleash your passion.